So I realized that in stopping and starting this video and re-recording it, because this is all, I don't know how to edit it, so this is all just from the cuff. I will start every video with all right or okay, and I will start every sentence with okay. I will say 300 times, and I will say as much as I can. So I need some kind of intro that'll be my new little cue that we're starting the video that doesn't have to be all right, okay. It's a mess. Okay, let's get started. So this is the second issue of the Seaport News, where I talk you through the relaunch of my Welcome to Seaport series. And this newsletter update in this video is all about From Scratch. And I said in the last video, honestly, that From Scratch gave me the absolute sort of hardest time, primarily because who I was as a writer now, and who I was as a writer when I wrote those novellas, they didn't quite meet. They were still living in the same community, but they didn't live in the same apartment building anymore. And it was frustrating for me, and I want to talk to you about how that has changed the story slightly. So I started writing my own original stories in what I'm just going to call the age of the love triangle. All the TV shows and movies I watched, there were just a whole bunch of stories with usually a conventionally attractive white woman choosing between two conventionally attractive white men, and they would draw out that sort of choice over seasons or many long minutes, and I would just think in all of those situations, why? Seriously. Either it was because why not just let her have them both, right? Or it was because there was very clearly a sort of front runner, someone that they were more compatible with, and then the other person had the same. In the Vampire Diaries, for the longest time, I just wanted them to let Damon choose Bonnie. But that didn't quite happen. And part of the reason that happened was also, or that didn't happen, is also part of the reason why I sort of write the kind of stories I write, which is that in those kinds of scenarios, women of color, especially Black women, do not fare well. Men of color often either are completely not present in those stories, or they also don't fare well. And From Scratch really was about me trying to sort of work through that as someone who at that point had mostly written fan fiction, and I hadn't written sort of full-length stories of my own probably since I was a kid, if I'm honest. Or maybe I don't know. I had not written much is what I'll say. And it was frustrating to sort of see those stories over and over again and think, I could do better. And From Scratch is sort of me wanting to do better and doing better at the time based on what I thought I could do, or what I could do. And as I went back and read From Scratch, I really had to confront the fact that that story is really Mary-centric. And some of that is not a problem. Mary is our sort of POV character for most of the book. She is the person that we see Seaport through her eyes for most of the book as well. But Santos and Knox have also relocated to Seaport. They've been there a little bit longer. They're a little bit more settled, but they are in a lot of ways in the same boat. And so it's fine that there are certain sort of ways that as the reader, we're discovering Seaport through Mary's eyes, but their relationship is also really Mary-centric. And that frustrated me as a reader of my own work. I don't actually enjoy reading polyamorous romances where all of the men, especially if they're queer, center their entire sort of sexual and romantic attraction on the woman. I'm really happy that we've stopped using reverse harem, but I don't write why choose romances. I write polyamorous romances. I'm trying to write people who are in relationships that are non-monogamous, where these people who are all queer or at least all in love with one another treat each other as such. And I was frustrated to see that my vision for the story did not quite meet what I wrote, which I think is sometimes true to a certain extent. But this was, I think, the widest gap I'd seen in going over some of my older stories, and I didn't love it. And I think it was my first sort of hurdle, primarily because I really sort of love queer men, like, in my life, and also reading about them, in particular queer men of color. There was a reason why I made sure that Knox and Santos, that their queerness was part of the story, and not just because I wanted them to cross swords, but because I wanted to write queer men of color who also got the opportunity to restart their life and to create a better sort of future for themselves and their loved ones and their families. In this case, meaning Knox, Santos, and Mary all together, but also Seaport as a whole. Like, I wanted to sort of center this story around people of color and queer men. And I think that the story really didn't allow that, which was frustrating as well, because I go through pains to sort of make it clear that Knox and Santos have a pre-existing relationship. They are or were friends since they met in the Marines, but also Santos has been in love with Knox in some way, shape, or form since he was 18. And yet there were no spaces in the story as I originally wrote it for that to sort of have the same kind of space as, say, Mary's anxiety about living in Seaport and sort of life not as an academic. And I wanted that to be clear on the page. So when I finally got over that sort of mental hurdle and started writing or rewriting the story, that was something I sort of kept my eye on. And I have notes, otherwise I would forget. I also wanted to make sure that, like, I was bringing the same kind of care to queer men of color that I had brought to Mary as a fat Black woman. And so it did mean I had to go back and adjust some scenes, how I wrote them, the language they used. And it also meant sort of beautifully that I got to write new scenes where I could sort of deal with those issues. And I think that for all the books, that is sort of the case. Some of it is sort of gentle sort of massaging of, like, the stories and editing, and some of it is, like, literally just saying, oh, there needs to be a different scene here so that you can see whatever it is I think or I thought I did not sort of represent well. And I should also say too that some of the problem of not sort of representing the queer men in the way that I wanted means that I think for the reader it was a little harder to understand some of their relationship dynamics. So over the years, I've had people assume that Mary was bi, which does actually make sense. I can understand how people got there. I very rarely explicitly say, like, the character's sexuality unless it is sort of coming up what I think is organically in the story. I've said this before, I don't write coming out stories, so some of this is sort of about sort of inferring the relationship based on how the characters interact with their communities. And so it makes a lot of sense for people to assume that Mary was bi, because so much of the story is about these queer people finding their space there. But she's very straight. She just happens to be in love with Knox, who is a bi man, and Santos, who is pansexual. This has happened before. A number of people, after reading Pink Slip, assumed that Lane was straight, which I thought was really funny, because I thought he was very bi on page, but apparently he was not, and that's okay. I sort of rectified that by writing New Year, New Me, and letting the three of them fuck Carlisle together. They like that. They might fuck other people together. We'll see. I think I can cuss on these videos. Anyway, so part of the revisions, a significant part of the revisions, I think, were centered on sort of beefing up the emotional relationship between Santos and Knox, and also creating spaces where Mary could also express her love for them, so that it did not feel like a one-way street. They were just loving her, and she was not loving them as well. So I think that was the biggest hurdle that I hopefully overcame. You all will let me know. The one I'm not sure if I overcame, because honestly I don't really think I ever figured out how, was the fact that Knox and Santos are first responders. I don't think I don't think I would write I would make Santos a cop and Knox a firefighter if I wrote though if I sat down to write those books like totally new. I don't know if I've ever talked about this publicly, but a good portion of my like actual scholarly research is on police brutality, specifically the police brutality that Black people face in the United States and England. And I I think my goal when I wrote this story originally was to very much focus on the fact that like if you put good people in these positions, they could do good work. Um, I guess in this sort of like escapist fantasy that I wrote, sure, right? Like they are in a small southern town that no one can find without coordinates or whatever I said. And there is the hope, right? That like once Santos gets the other men on the police force retired and he can sort of take control of it, that like he can make this town safe and he can uphold all of the things that I think are central to my morals and are in my books, right? But I think it's such a slippery slope. And I have such a hard time, honestly, sort of dealing with the fact that, like, someone could potentially, like, recommend these books and see, oh, if you want to see a good representation of a cop. Like, no, I don't like it. But I couldn't change that part of them. That is actually central to the story. It is central to their characterization. It's central to so many of the other stories that you have Santos and Knox there as the sort of like representatives of the town. And I couldn't change it. And I think I wrote it well for what it was at the time. I really did sort of give thought to where I'm writing and thinking about what it means to be a cop, like as a Mexican American man and a firefighter as a Black American man, like what that means in this place. And even if it doesn't make it on the page, like these are conversations I had with myself as I was revising. And I think it's probably a continuation of conversations I probably had when I first wrote these books. If I could have changed it, I honestly probably would. And so I guess I'm telling you this partially one because you asked for behind the scenes info. So my overthinking and anxiety is what you get alongside the cover reveals and the Spotify playlist. But I also think if you followed me on Twitter, this is not a shock, but I don't like the sort of blanket assumption that romances are, broadly speaking, feminist and progressive. Some of them are not. Some of them want to be, and they fall short, which is what I think I did with the first edition of From Scratch, and I'm also trying to rectify. It matters to me that someone who is as deeply skeptical of the police and first responders and their perpetuation of various kinds of discrimination, it matters to me that I sort of wrote myself into a bit of a corner, and I have to live with that, right? Like, these are stories that I still think are valuable and they still matter. There's like stuff here. These are stories that I think matter, but I would not have written them the same way, knowing what I know now and also what's happened in the last 6 years or so since I published them. I would have changed that. I didn't change it, and I think that in future books in the series, because it is going to continue, I might sort of have to deal with this in a much more pointed way. But I think it would be remiss for me to pretend as if that's not a thing I'm thinking about, that that's not a thing that informed the revisions of these books, even if it didn't significantly change the story itself. I think as someone who absolutely thinks that romance is a valuable lens into society, it does matter that I tell you that that's a thing I'm thinking about. And it matters that I tell you that the book I wrote 6 years ago is not the book I would write again, because I think I owe not just Black and brown communities that I'm a part of, but also queer communities that I'm a part of. I owe that kind of deep consideration, even if, again, it isn't changing the book significantly. I should, at the very least, sort of give it thought and understand why I made the choices I made. That got a little heavy at the end, but I think the overall goal for these videos is really for me to sort of kind of talk you through how I made these books, these new versions of the books, still the stories that you all love, but with the kind of care and consideration that I had to learn how to bring to the stories that I'm telling. And not that any of them are perfect, because I'm not, but that I have at the very least thought about what I am doing and why. Okay. So this is the first of obviously 4 reveals where I talk you through, where I show you in the newsletter, the new covers, my inspo, all that good stuff. And then I also talk you through what are, or what were, we're still working, some of the sort of more frustrating parts of revising the books and relaunching them. So next time we're talking about inheritance and exhibitionism and grief. Because, yeah, that's what that book is about. All right. Thank you for watching, if you did watch. And I'll see you in about a week for more.